You know, if you're starting to feel like nothing nothing really affects you anymore on this journey, you may think that that something is wrong, but it could also mean that you're finally starting to find that space within yourself, the stillness, the space between, like your thoughts and your emotions, and then being right here in that in-between space, that stillness. And you realize that it doesn't take as much work as you thought, because it's always there, you know. It's just about the discovery, and discovering means that it was always there. You just didn't know where to look. But all you really had to do is kind of just look inside. But there's so many things from the external that stops you from looking on the inside, right? Like, there's so many distractions. There's so many things that are put in front of us to infect our internal, that pulls us away from that stillness and that space. The stories we tell about ourselves. But once you start to understand that the thoughts which lead to the emotions are just stories that you're telling yourself, you can just stop it and just sit still. And in that stillness and in that space, that's when you realize that the pain and the suffering was absolutely necessary. I always say suffering is a choice, and it is, but suffering becomes a choice after you understand that the suffering was necessary. You can only get to the point of stillness and get to the point of living in that space after you recognize and understand where your suffering was coming from and just how long you were choosing to suffer. Because you can only heal if you've been hurt, right? Like, there's nothing to heal if something ain't hurt or broken, and it takes intense pain and suffering to get to that real point of stillness in space. And even when you think you're doing the right thing, the quote unquote right thing, and you're doing all these things, reading all these books and, these meditations, which are, they do help. But even in doing that, you can still get caught up in a certain external validation of it, and it could still derive from an ego. Sometimes even saying that you want to get rid of your ego is egotistical, And once you realize that, it all just kind of becomes more clear. So if you feel like that's where you're at, and that's probably why you found this video, That's why I was compelled to make it, you know, because in creativity, there is that sense of ego and validation. You know, there is seeking of those things. And in seeking can cause suffering as well, you know? Like, because when you're seeking, you're telling yourself that you don't have it. And that's what this is about, you know? Like, you do have it. You have the space. It's already inside you. Like, if you tell yourself, I am, and then you stop right there, and you allow yourself to sit with the I am, you can see, or you can feel what you are, you know? Ask yourself, who am I? And you might not have an answer, and that's okay. That's kind of the point, you know? We get so attached to our things, you know, our cars, our clothes, our relationships. All these things are added up to a sum of who we are. And our stories that we've been telling ourselves for years, since we were children, you know? But all those things constantly take us away from the present moment. And the present moment is the only thing that matters, you know? Because the more and more we focus on the past, it'll just invite suffering. It's constant suffering. And then the future isn't here, you know? The future really is the present, because every time you get to the future, that's where you are. You're in the present. So even when you plan a trip, or you have plans with friends, it's still important to understand that the only thing that matters is that present moment. And, you know, I was the other day thinking about, like, that's why I think God teaches us to be more like children. Because if you ever talk to a child, and be around children, they really do only focus on what's happening right there in the moment. They're not, they don't have developed enough brains to form complex thoughts yet. So, like, the concept of the past and the future, it doesn't mean anything to them. It doesn't, they don't dwell on those things, Only thing that matters is right there in the moment. When they want something, they want it right now, When they're upset because something didn't happen right now. Children don't sit and think about the past and then start crying. They only cry when they don't get what they want right there in the moment. And that is also a form of ego. Like, there's ego in children, but they only live in the present moment. And when you become an adult and you get to that point where you could be still and be in the present moment, it's a beautiful thing. That's why being out in nature is so important, because nature is the definition of stillness. Like, if you just sit and stare at the sky. Like that's all it is. It's just stillness. And you can stare at the sky and just allow yourself to sit there in that space, in that nothingness. You know, I think about dying, and I think about how it scares me, and how much I want to make real peace with that, the fact that we all die. And in the journey of trying to find peace with death, you lose sight of life because you get so caught up in the fact that it's over. But even looking at life from the standpoint of my life derives from ego, because we are life. This is life. And when you are able to find the space between your thoughts and your emotions and sit in that stillness, that's what that is. Like, that is life. Even when things are good, it's still important not to get too caught up into anything. The phrase, "this too shall pass." Right now I'm reading New Earth from Eckhart Tolle, and learning about the phrase, "this too shall pass," it's something that I've always heard. My mom said that to me all the time, and you usually only hear it when things are going bad, but you can apply it to good things too, because nothing lasts. So when you lose people, whether to death or breakups or whatever, and it hurts and it causes you so much emotional pain that you have no choice but to solve it and to heal from it. If you go back and you if you think about the good times, this too shall pass. And sometimes moving forward isn't about moving at all. It's just kind of sitting still and occupying your own space. And a lot of the time, the only way to do that is alone. So even when you get to the point where you're alone and you feel like you've been alone for so long that you don't even want to be around people, you feel like you don't want to be with anybody else, at first it might be out of fear or anger, resentment. But then you realize that it's not about any of those things. It's just about knowing that where you are constantly is in the present moment. And being with someone else, yeah, it could take you out of that moment, and it could feel nice, and then it could be bad. But you're always going to be there, here. This is the only place that we ever are, right now. And sometimes you have those thoughts and it just makes you completely break down. And you feel like you don't know where you're going to go and what you're going to do. And then sometimes in that space, it sparks ideas and it makes you want to do something. But you understand that your doing isn't from ego. You know, sometimes doing it, you're not even doing it for yourself. You just know that it's something that you have to do, you know. So if this made sense to you, great. And if this found you, then yeah, and you watched the whole thing, then I'm sure it made a little bit of sense to you. I'm grateful and I'm happy to be here. And I love you all.